Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're jam-packed, and we're in a great mood. We're going to keep it really, really fun, keep it really lighthearted today, just because we like doing that anyway, but also some days it's perhaps more important than others. Maybe, perhaps, today is one of those days. Let's tell you what we have in store for you. We're going to celebrate a Georgia player who really seems to have won over his teammates and also kind of bumps into a kind of an interesting story in the news. We'll talk about some of that here before we're done today. Jake Fromm is going to join us. We have a lot to get into with Jake about the upcoming game against Ole Miss on Saturday. Connor Riley also pops by today, too. When Connor is here, one of the things I'll do with him is preview the fact that tonight is the debut edition of the College Football Playoff Top 25. Perhaps this is a little bit more interesting this year because of the fact that it's a new expanded playoff format. There's just sort of some new stuff around all of that. We'll talk about that a bit today. We promised you eventually we'd kind of make fun of Billy Napier and the lousy stinking Gators. We have reason to do that here today. That's going to be a lot of fun. And off the top, I'm going to tell you why. Going into Ole Miss on Saturday, despite all the issues that everybody's aware of for Georgia, I'm actually fairly optimistic about UGA. And not only do I think this could be a day in which Georgia goes on the road and earns a hard-fought win, I also think this could be the kind of day in which Georgia sort of demonstrates what might make it very tough to beat throughout the rest of the stretch run of the upcoming season, too. Let me lay out my case here to kind of kick things off. We're really glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Oh, there is concern around DawgNation about Saturday's game against Ole Miss. You kind of understand where some of this comes from, but in general today, and I started yesterday's show by saying this, I'm actually in a pretty peaceful place when it comes to Georgia football right now. Fairly optimistic about, the rest of the season. Certainly very happy about beating Florida. Just feeling really good about all that. Obviously no one knows how this season's going to end. I'm resigned to the idea, well, maybe this one doesn't quite end in as happy a fashion as the seasons in 2021 and 2022 did. Perhaps that's the case. Maybe Georgia falls a little short here at some point in time along the way. But our goal is to enjoy the run for as long as it lasts. And if it lasts all the way until the middle of January, then we'll take that. And if it comes up a little short before that, then I guess we'll deal with that too. But we're going to try to enjoy as much of this as we can possibly have. And so with that in mind for today's show, we're going to try to be really fun, really lighthearted. We're going to make fun of Florida a little bit. I've got some pretty surprising news to tell you here at the end of the show today, which I think you may raise an eyebrow at. We'll give you all of that here over the course of the time. Generally speaking, kind of lighthearted and pretty relaxed today in a pretty good mood, even in the face of a great challenge coming up for Georgia on Saturday. Because what a lot of people saw from Ole Miss, Georgia's opponent this past weekend against Arkansas, was a team that put up 63 points on the road against Arkansas. And a team that now leads the nation in yards per play offensively at 7.71 yards per play. The diabolical play-calling genius Lane Kiffin, the veteran quarterback Jackson Dart, all of this standing in the way of Georgia on Saturday, and the kind of thing that you get butterflies in your stomach perhaps just thinking about. And in my case, certainly an ample stomach indeed. But not all of that understood and all of that kind of, granted. I think there are some reasons on Saturday to be pretty optimistic about Georgia. And I'm going to try to lay out my case for that over the course of the next couple of minutes. And in fact, I'm going to try to take you to this point. Not only do I feel like Georgia has a very good chance of winning this game on Saturday, I also feel like it could be a pretty important day in terms of Georgia demonstrating what might make it tough to compete against and beat in the remainder of this season's games, too. This could be a little bit of a, I don't want to say introduction, because Georgia's certainly been on the national stage now for quite some time, but a reminder, perhaps, of what Georgia might be bringing to the table in all of these big games that still remain for Georgia in 2024. So why do I feel that way? Well, let me start with this. I thought that C.J. Allen, the Georgia linebacker, had a very interesting answer to a question yesterday about the fact that all of a sudden now, after having played Texas and played Alabama and a neutral site game against Clemson and all these tough games already for Georgia in the 2024 season, Georgia now goes into Oxford on Saturday to have to face Ole Miss, another really tough game for UGA. And look, you can talk about, well, Georgia's having to play a tougher schedule than some other SEC teams are, and you can kind of gnash teeth about that, and you can kind of sort of make that into kind of a negative thing. But in the case of C.J. Allen, as he talked about this yesterday, he also put a very positive spin on kind of what it means for Georgia now, especially on his side of the ball on defense, now that they have had to go into so many tough environments, kind of what that says about the Georgia defense in a spot like this on Saturday. There was one phrase in particular that Allen used that certainly got my attention. This is the Georgia linebacker yesterday.
I would definitely say we're better tested just because of things that we go through day in, day out at practice. Like, that allows us to be better tested. Also, of course, the games allow us to be better tested on the road and stuff like that. But, like, those games in the past and stuff like that, so we got to focus on the Ole Miss. But to your point, yeah, I definitely say we're better tested with being on the road for sure.
I mean, to me, that's a great reframe for what Georgia is right now, because you can talk about, early in the season, a game like Kentucky, a little closer than some thought it might be. A game against Alabama, you sort of know what that turned into. Hard-fought game against Texas. That was obviously dramatic because of all the stuff that went on there. You can talk about all this stuff step for step. The Florida game this past weekend certainly gave you plenty to discuss. But a different way to kind of frame all that is, after all that Georgia's been through, this may be the most battle-tested team in the country. And thus far, we really haven't thought of Georgia in the same category defensively, certainly as it was in 2021, perhaps not even what it was in 2022. But I do believe this team has already shown more defensively, with all due respect. I believe this team this year has already shown more defensively than the 2023 team did, to hold Clemson to 3 points to begin the season, to be up 23-0 at the half against Texas and never really be all that tested at any point in time during that game. Georgia always kind of having the lead there, kind of leading wire to wire. I believe the Georgia defense has shown you a lot here. And it sounds like C.J. Allen sort of feels that way too, saying, we think our group is battle-tested. Yeah, we got to go face a, Ole Miss team that just scored 63 points and an Ole Miss team that's averaging 7.71 yards per play. But guess what? They got to take on a battle-tested defense to get that done. And you love when a guy like C.J. Allen, who's still a little bit on the young side, when he steps up and speaks so forcefully about his unit, about his team. And I think that kind of goes in line with something that Kirby Smart said yesterday about a guy like Allen, who this time a year ago playing really, first start against the Rebels and kind of only just then getting playing time. But now, based on what we just saw against Florida this past Saturday, perhaps is coming into his own at the exact right time for Georgia here this season. This is what Kirby Smart said about that guy, C.J. Allen, yesterday.
Yeah, I think his confidence has improved. I was watching the Ole Miss game from last year, and I'm remembering, him and Raylan having to be out there together and playing in that game, and that's not normal for an inside linebacker to be playing as a true freshman in that magnitude of a game. And I think about seeing that picture and then seeing the picture of him playing against Florida. I thought the Florida game was one of his best games since being here. All in all, he had a couple touchdown saving type tackles. He had a couple checks on our defense. The obvious was the interception. He's a high motor, high energy, and you know what? He practices really hard too. So it carries over for him, and we have to keep him improving at that same rate.
First of all, if you're watching on video, shout out to Kirby Smart for going double zipper there. He has the golf shirt on with the quarter zip over that, and then the zip up kind of like windbreaker hoodie type thing on top of that. You love double zipper. Nothing speaks to like November and the fall time of year more so than kind of going double zipper on some of that. For someone like me, the more layers you can wear, probably the better. So I like layered times of year, and that's what you got from Kirby Smart right there. But more importantly, what you got is, I think, a pretty good evaluation of C.J. Allen and what he is able to do for Georgia right now. And you kind of pair this with, look, Jalen Walker probably played his best football against Texas, and he kind of showed you what he had a chance to be. Chaz Chambliss had a couple of sacks on Saturday against Florida, kind of giving you an idea of the fact that he can be a playmaker for you too. And then Kirby Smart kind of referencing Allen right there and talking about all of the things that he's doing right now, looking more confident, certainly playing that way. Everybody remarking about the other thing that Smart mentioned in that clip, which was the unbelievable interception that Allen was responsible for against Florida on Saturday. And y'all, this to me is that Georgia defense at its best. When you're making these kind of shocking wow factor plays, and when it seems like the other side's about to get something good and somebody just kind of comes out of nowhere and does something amazing to prevent that from happening, that's been the hallmark of what Georgia's been defensively. And it was Allen's turn to do that for Georgia on Saturday, and I love the way, to speak of that, when Kirby Smart also talked about that back on Saturday after the game. I love the way that Smart described this, because when you think about what Georgia needs to be down the stretch against really good teams and good offenses the rest of the way, plays like this from Georgia are going to be of just such crucial importance. So let's hear Smart back on Saturday talking about what Allen did in getting that interception.
It was a big play. I thought the guy was wide open, and they had a nice play called, a little bootleg action that was a copycat play from one we had seen earlier this year and giving up a touchdown, and the guy was open. C.J. Allen made a freaky, unbelievable play to jump up and snag it, and that was probably the biggest change in the game.
Listen, I like that word, freaky. And I mentioned before, I think this defense this year is probably better than Georgia's defense was last year, and perhaps this is just my intuition, and maybe it's wrong, but I sort of get the impression that Georgia's a little, to use the word that Smart just used, a little freakier defensively, athletically this year than maybe it was a year ago. That's what Jalen Walker was against Texas. That's what C.J. Allen was against Florida on Saturday. And that's what Georgia needs to be here moving forward. And, listen, I think that the game, the big stage, national audience in Oxford against the Rebels on Saturday, I think it gives them a real chance to do that, because for everything that you want to say about, well, they just scored 63 points against Arkansas and they're averaging 7.78 or 7.1 yards per play. The truth is this is an Ole Miss offense that against SEC competition this year has not been as good week to week as they were this past week. They only scored 17 points in a loss to Kentucky. They scored 27 points in a win against South Carolina, 26 points in a loss to LSU, also 26 points in a win against Oklahoma. But if memory serves correct, they were losing that game at the half, right? In other words, the only SEC opponent in which Ole Miss has scored at least 30 points on this year was Arkansas this past week. Now, they scored 63. That's a lot, but it's also a tremendous outlier in comparison to everything else that they've been doing for most of this season. So not only do I think that Georgia's perhaps showing some freakiness here defensively and a chance to kind of display that athleticism even more, I also think this is an Ole Miss offense that can be had. I mean, Georgia, in beating Ole Miss a year ago, an offense that also included Quinshon Judkins, in beating Ole Miss a year ago, only allowed 17 points. So I think this can be a big day for Georgia defensively on Saturday. But at the same time, I don't want to undersell the threat that the Rebels provide here, because the quarterback, Jackson Dart, is having a really good year. And one of the things that Dart does well is the kind of thing that at times Georgia's had its issues with, the running quarterback who keeps plays alive with his legs. So you got to be careful about that. You've got to be mindful of that. And to go back to Kirby again, yesterday he talked about what you've got to be committed to if you want to make it happen against the Rebels. Here's Kirby on stopping the running quarterback.
We've played a lot of quarterbacks that are good runners this year. You tackle the quarterback like he's a running back. You have to approach it that way. I mean, he's 225 pounds and he lowers his shoulders and he's physical. He doesn't give himself up very often. So we don't coach it any different than tackling a back. He might drop his shoulder. He might choose to slide. You have to react to what he does, but you have to be physical now. You can't approach this guy like he's going to give himself up, because he'll run right through you.
Here's the sort of honest, full disclosure part of this is that I've referenced a couple times the great performance that I thought Georgia had defensively against Texas, but the challenge of Texas is really different than the challenge of Ole Miss, because when it was mostly Quinn Ewers in that game, Ewers sort of stands tall in the pocket. In some cases, the Texas play is a little slow developing, gives you a little bit more chance for the pass rush to get there. By reputation, that's not really what Ole Miss does as much. They move a lot quicker. looking to get the ball out probably pretty fast, and Dart looking to take off and run when he has the chance to. So the way in which Georgia stopped Texas is very different than the challenge of how it'll also stop Ole Miss. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that Georgia can be very much equal to that task on Saturday. Let me give you kind of one more thing here, and we'll wrap this particular topic up for a moment. I was looking at some of the advanced stat type numbers. Did you know that Georgia's the number 5 defense in America right now, according to the ESPN Football Power Index? And they've done that as the number 1 team from a strength of schedule standpoint. So nobody's played a tougher crop of opponents this year than Georgia, according to ESPN's FPI. And understanding all that, Georgia's still the number 5 defense. By comparison, the Ole Miss offense is just number 8. So at least theoretically, Georgia has even a slight advantage, defense versus offense, when Ole Miss offense on the field from a sort of advanced stats analytic standpoint here. But I think pretty quietly, this Georgia defense really is kind of stepping up maybe at the right time and perhaps about to be a big part of what we kind of think the Georgia identity is. Saturday's another big day for that to happen, for another big day for this defense to showcase itself. You know, last year, Georgia was successful in shutting down this Rebels offense, one of the biggest wins that Georgia got in 2023. If they did it then, there's no reason why they can't do it again this Saturday. And if they do, it could serve as a pretty sharp reminder here as we move through the month of November into the real stretch run of the season that Georgia plans on remaining a very central part of the conversation for who from the SEC makes the college football playoff. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad you're with us. However you get to us, video, radio, podcast, all those platforms. So thankful for that and really appreciative of our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. The restoration specialists of ServPro, they do a very specific job. And it's one of the things that we, I think, have as a theme for a lot of our great sponsors. People who've kind of dedicated their lives to like one very, I guess, narrow lane of, hey, we're going to be there for people if they've had damage to their property. The home they live in, the commercial property where their business is housed, perhaps some passive income from a rental property, something like that. If you've had fire damage, water intrusion, if you've had a mess to clean up, our folks at ServPro know how to get it put back together like it never even happened. Cleaned up like it never even happened. That's why they are restoration specialists. I was talking to some folks from ServPro the other day. They've been so busy out right now with all the stuff related to some of the cleanup, as the storms we've been having, and obviously here in Georgia, but into the Carolinas too, and some really scary, sad things that have been going on. Yet the folks from ServPro have been right at the forefront of all of that, getting it cleaned up, helping folks get back up on their feet again, working with insurance companies to kind of get all that done. That is what ServPro is all about for you. And if you've got your own kind of story going on, if you've had a fire breakout, if you've had a water main break or a pipe burst or all the stuff that could lead to a very messy cleanup situation, the restoration specialists of ServPro want to do that work for you too. So please find them online. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. Every ServPro franchise independently owned and operated. So when you do business with ServPro, you're doing business with someone who's got just as much of a vested interest in a positive outcome for you as you do for yourself. So one more time online, it's servpro.com. for a lot more on that. So we got 2 great guests here coming up. It is Connor Riley in a moment to talk about all things related to Georgia. The former quarterback, Jake Fromm, before we're done, we'll kind of get into some of the stuff as it relates to what's next for the Georgia offense, the challenge of facing Lane Kiffin. We'll cover all of that ground with Jake Fromm here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And I told you eventually we would have to kind of get to, I think, some of the silliness that persists around the Florida program. To me, it's really sad what they've kind of fallen into in this sort of stage, I guess, empire in decline in some respects. They just, I think, have completely recalibrated their expectations. I mean, if you listen to it, it almost sort of sounds like they are very close to kind of hanging a banner for the fact they kept it close against Georgia. Now, we've seen a lot of teams, kind of brag about weird stuff like that over the years and perhaps do the woulda, coulda, shoulda thing of, well, if so-and-so didn't get hurt, all the stuff that would have happened and whatever. Just sort of sad to see Florida now become the latest to do that. I mean, this is a program, believe it or not, I'm actually old enough that I remember when Florida was good. Many of you, perhaps even the majority of our audience, too young to remember back when Florida was a contending team. It's hard to imagine this, but near the turn of this century in the early aughts, Florida actually won a national championship. A lot of our audience not alive the last time that happened, but believe it or not, it did occur. And so that is what at least many of the parents of current Florida students perhaps have a living memory of and some experience with. You'd like to think that some of that pride, some of that sense of prestige would still be remaining in the Florida program, that they have some memory of what they once were and some, dignity or just determination to kind of maintain that kind of competitive spirit. But essentially that's all evaporated. It's all gone away. Florida really no longer speaks that way at all. In fact, all of a sudden now they're high-fiving and hanging mission accomplished banners because of the fact they even kept it close against Georgia on Saturday. In fact, for Billy Napier, boy, you listen to him talk, all of a sudden it sounds like he saved his job. All of a sudden now he's not quite worried about the unemployment line as much anymore. All of a sudden now he sort of knows that he can work at Florida now at least for another year here. Napier letting it be known that they came into this game with some confidence on Saturday. And the result backs that up, at least according to Billy Napier. This is what he said after the game.
I think we have really impressive kids. I think we have some unbelievable human beings on our team. We don't have a distraction. We don't have one guy that's not compliant. We have no discipline issues. We got a group that shows up on time. They work. And I think the leaders on our team have done a great job holding people accountable. And it's becoming the expectation. And ultimately, when it starts to work and you play toe-to-toe with some of the better teams, you start to believe, right? So for the first time since I've been the head coach here, we showed up. We believe we can beat that team.
So there you go. And I think that Kaylee Manziel brings up a good point. She thought at the beginning of that clip perhaps a little bit of a sort of a lukewarm welterweight attempt at maybe some shade at Georgia about discipline issues, things like that, obviously coupled with the social media post from the lousy, stinking Gators we talked about on Friday. So I guess that's Billy Napier's passive-aggressive attempt at kind of getting back at Georgia. Maybe that's the case. But it's the last part of that I think that you really can't help but pay attention to. Napier says, for the first time ever, man, we thought we could win this game. Here's the problem with that. A, this is year 3. So Florida that once, and Georgia fans will tell you this, Florida at one point in time had Georgia's number. Now we've got a coach at Florida that doesn't even aspire to beat Georgia anymore. All of a sudden now he's like, well, finally, my third year, I felt like we had a chance to come in here and keep this one close and be competitive. That gives you an idea that Billy Napier's attempt to sort of transform Florida into the sort of Sun Belt team that he's used to coaching, we're sort of moving along, unabated when it comes to that. You sort of can't help but notice that. But here's the other thing too. Many of us remember like a couple of years ago when Dan Mullen, the ex-Florida coach, was saying very similar things. Like you remember when he only lost by like a single-digit margin to Georgia in 2019, and they were asking him after the game about like, hey, what's the gap between you and Georgia? And he's like, it's 7 points, 9 points, whatever the margin was that day. I forget what it was. He's like, that's the gap between us and Georgia. In other words, saying we kept it relatively close against UGA, which proves we're relatively equal to UGA. But obviously, over the course of the next 3 seasons, Georgia would go on to win 2 national championships. And over the course of the next 3 seasons, Dan Mullen would go on to become a TV analyst because he got ran out of the SEC and ran out of college football because, as Kirby Smart made very clear, Mullen said he did not want to recruit. So for Billy Napier, who kind of hangs his hat on, we kind of kept it close. Well, that seems to be, enough to keep your job maybe for next year because the truth is Florida didn't want to fire you anyway. But I'm not quite so sure that that speaks very much for the long haul. Dan Mullen kind of proves that. Also, though, there's this, and I apologize, this is a little bit more of a video thing than an audio thing. But before I bring on Connor Riley, I want to remind you of the very recent past. On our desk every day, we have the Billy Napier Swamp Water because Napier has a little bit of a history with having trouble with water bottles. You may remember.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's go back and take a look at this.
Given the
Watch Napier here.
And how.
So you see Napier, if you're watching on video, he's trying to get the water bottle open, and he just can't. This is like the saddest thing I've ever seen because he tries. And eventually, you can even see his face. Look how strained his face is. He's trying to get the water bottle open, and finally he just gives up, which is sort of a microcosm of the Florida program at all, trying eventually and then giving up inevitably. And that's kind of what Napier was with the water bottle there. It's a really sad thing to see. Well, our Kaylee Manziel, truly an intrepid reporter, was on the scene Saturday night for the Napier press conference, and we had a similar issue where Billy Napier is now 0-2 in his career against water bottles. 0-3 against Kirby Smart, 0-2 against water bottles, because on Saturday, once again, trying to get the water bottle open, working with that, finally just sort of sets it down and then knocks over a water bottle. I mean, this poor guy, winning football games hard enough. Managing the water bottles proven to be pretty difficult there as well. Could not get one open. Struggling with that one on Saturday. Knocking over a water bottle. Sort of disheveled and in disarray. A clear avatar for the Florida program overall. So sad to see what was once a mighty program falling on hard times. But that ain't Georgia's problem, because the dogs live on, and the Gator Hater Update are very much alive when it comes to all of that. So that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Now, before we're done, we got great stuff with Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, really kind of getting into exactly what to expect from an offensive standpoint in this game against Ole Miss on Saturday. What Carson Beck needs to do, what to expect from Lane Kiffin. We'll cover all that ground here in a moment. But for now, everything related to UGA, including to where it might fall in tonight's release of the College Football Playoff Top 25. Let's talk to Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always great to have Connor Riley part of the program. I think Connor and I both enjoy the, whether they matter or not, we enjoy the College Football Playoff Top 25 release. That comes out tonight for the first time. We'll be live on video talking about that this evening. And Connor, I want to talk to you about that here in a moment. Before we get to that, though, let me ask you about what I talked about to begin the show today. That's the Georgia defense. In that, I know there were some issues with the rushing defense, especially kind of third quarter on Saturday. But the truth is, I thought for the most part the Georgia defense kind of did its job. I think obviously Florida had quarterback issues, things like that. But for the most part, I thought the Georgia defense did its job. Clearly had a great performance against Texas. And as I kind of laid out to begin the show, I'm pretty optimistic what this group might be able to do against Ole Miss on Saturday, even though Ole Miss just had a big explosive performance against Arkansas. Do you think that Georgia is the kind of team, and this is the kind of defense where Georgia can lean on this unit in these big games that are still yet to come for Georgia here this year?
Absolutely. I think you look at Georgia's record so far this season and their big wins against Clemson, against Texas, they won because of their defense. I know Carson Beck had turnovers in the game against Alabama, but the biggest reason that Georgia found itself in that early hole was because the defense played poorly. And they fixed a lot of the things since then. And I know coming into the season, the belief was that if Georgia was going to win a national championship, the offense was going to be the big reason why. I think it's clear as day now that if Georgia's going to win a national title this year, it will be because of this defense like it was in 2021. And as far as the Florida game this weekend, I think when DJ Lagway went out, and yes, he had the long touchdown pass where Malachi Starks did have a bust in coverage, Lagway was only 2 of 7 passing the ball at that point. And I think when Lagway went out, I think Georgia knew that they could just play very vanilla on defense and do what they needed to do to come away with the win. They didn't need to be super aggressive. They didn't need to, play a very attacking style like I think you saw them do against Texas. And it's hard to ratchet up that level of intensity each and every game. That's just not possible, especially when you're working with 18 to 22-year-olds. But going into an Ole Miss game where Ole Miss does not run the ball very well, their offensive line is not that strong, certainly not on the caliber of Texas. I think that this defense is going to have a chance to make another statement on the road on Saturday, and I look forward to seeing how this group goes about meeting the challenge.
The flip side of that on offense, and obviously we did a lot on Carson Beck yesterday, it certainly seems like that Georgia's in kind of an interesting conundrum, to use a bigger word than I should perhaps use, offensively, because this is a running game, and eventually on this show this week, we've got to talk about the fact that Georgia has essentially abandoned the run. This is a Georgia team that no longer really believes it can run it. When they attempt to throw deep, that's where a lot of these interceptions come from. That it sort of seems like this is going to be a Georgia team that still has a responsibility to score points, but kind of trying to do that a little bit like how it did it in the second half against Florida with the sort of short or intermediate passing routes, perhaps somewhat simplified. I don't mean from a schematic standpoint, but just in terms of athletically what you're asking guys to do, that it sort of seems like that's what Georgia perhaps needs to be going forward because of its struggles running the ball and the challenge of overcoming some interceptions. Is it too late in the year for Georgia to kind of reinvent what it wants to be offensively? Because it almost seems like that's what's staring it in the face right now.
Well, I think it's unfair to say that they're abandoning the running game. I mean, Nate Frazier did have 19 carries on Saturday, and they've made it a point to try and establish him and the run in that game. I think the big thing now with Trevor Etienne dealing with rib injuries, and you have Branson Robinson out. Roderick Robinson hasn't played at all this year. They're just very thin at that running back room. And I think you saw this in the Texas game. They want to try and manage how much they use Trevor Etienne, knowing they can't. And Trevor's not built to consistently rack up 25 carries a game. He's clearly Georgia's best running back. And so they know that this is a team that is going to, have visions of playing deep into the season. They do, in some regard, have to manage that. So as far as the rest of the offense, look, it just comes down to the simple fact of, at least this past Saturday, Carson Beck's interceptions were very poor. Not all interceptions are created equally. I think you and I agree that sometimes, the idea of throwing interceptions, it can be over-exaggerated, but the kinds that Carson Beck was throwing on Saturday, where the first two were on first down, you've just got to throw the ball away there. Carson said it after the game himself. The Florida defense didn't really stop the Georgia offense. The only person who was able to stop Georgia's offense on Saturday was Carson Beck. They've been able to scheme some things up. You saw the big pass to Arian Smith. Lawson Lucky had another explosive catch. I believe they're ranked 4th in the country in pass plays of 30 yards or more, 7th in pass plays of 20 yards or more. They're still finding ways to create explosives in this passing offense. I think the bigger issue right now is just Carson and his in-game decision-making. Not so much even forcing balls that he shouldn't, but knowing when and where to make those throws. It's one thing if it's on third down and you need a conversion to keep a drive alive. But these interceptions happening on first down, 5 of the 11 that have happened this season have been on first down. That's where it's inexcusable. And that's the thing that I think they need to go out there and try and fix.
So I'm excited about the CFP Top 25 coming out tonight. I'm curious to sort of ask this in an open-ended way and kind of dive into it beyond that. What do you think the main storylines are tonight as we kind of see, I guess, the committee's first crack at how they're evaluating these teams at the moment?
The larger point is how they rank these SEC and Big Ten teams, because it's sort of going through it and using the AP poll as a guide. I had of the 12 slots, 8 of the 12 slots going to SEC and Big Ten teams. And we know that the SEC and Big Ten have opened up the idea that they would like at least 4 buys or 4 at-large or selection spots for both conferences. And you've got teams like Penn State and Indiana that haven't played all that many great teams and aren't going to have these marquee wins. And they're probably going to be ranked in the top 12 without really having played anybody except Ohio State, who Ohio State in all likelihood will have beaten both of those teams. On the SEC side, you've got a real jumbled mess there where outside the top 10, you've got Alabama, you've got LSU, you've got Texas A&M, you've got Ole Miss, all bunched up in that 11 to 16 range there. So how does that go and get sorted out going into this first college football playoff rankings? Because I do believe, obviously LSU and Alabama play each other this weekend, and some of this will get sorted out as the season goes along here. But how does the committee view those two power conference schools in conjunction with, say, an SMU team that's ranked 13th in the AP poll and has an excellent chance of getting to the ACC title game with an 11-1 record, where that one loss is to the projected Big 12 champion in BYU? So how I think they go about differentiating right now and balancing out these SEC and Big Ten teams and how that compares to the rest of the sport, I think is the thing that I am most interested in seeing what we see tonight out of the College Football Playoff Committee.
Yeah, the template I have in my mind is sort of a 4-4, 1-1, 1-1 type format, where if things break, I would say normally, it'll be 4 SEC teams, 4 Big Ten teams, 1 Big 12, 1 ACC, 1 Group of 5, and also Notre Dame. I think it's fair to point out, we just saw the AP top 10 from this most recent week. Even after losing to Northern Illinois, Notre Dame is easily a top 10 team right now, and I think they've got no problem, as it currently stands, making the college football playoff. I think the Big 12 and the ACC are interesting here. Clemson lost on Saturday. Iowa State lost on Saturday. What do you think the chances are? You mentioned SMU. That's an interesting team worth paying attention. It's also weird in the fact that you have a lot of these ACC teams that may come down to some very weird tiebreakers, which has been talked about a little bit. What do you think the chances are that either the ACC or the Big 12 produces that second team that would have the potential of being a bid thief from either the SEC or the Big 10 and preventing one or both those leagues from getting the 4 teams in the playoff? How likely do you see that as being here right now?
Let's get real spicy here, Brandon. Let's say that there is a 10-2 Alabama team at the end of the regular season, which means that they beat LSU. And there is an 11-1 SMU team with their only loss being against BYU. And then they go and play in the ACC title game. How do you differentiate between those two teams? Because that's a decision that I think is very much on the possibility. It's a decision that's going to have to be made. And how do you reward an SMU team that largely took care of business? Its one loss came against BYU, who at least as of right now projects to be the Big 12 champion. And you've got an Alabama team that, yes, they had the big win over Georgia. They would have a road win over LSU, but they haven't exactly looked like the vintage Alabama team of old. A year ago, when faced with a very similar decision, an Alabama team or an ACC team, in this case, Florida State, the committee went with Alabama there, and Alabama did have the SEC championship. They would not in this case. I don't know how they're going to use that ACC championship game in particular, because that looks like it could be, assuming Miami wins out, they will be a team that likely makes the college football playoff going into that weekend. I don't know how the committee is going to punish teams in this new 12-team playoff when they lose that extra added game in a conference title game. And so I think that there's a very, very good possibility that you've got an 11-1 SMU team vying for a spot against, in all likelihood, a 2-loss SEC team. And that's going to be really interesting there. Now, maybe they decide to make the argument, say, against an 11-1 Indiana against an 11-1 SMU, because I think that's maybe perhaps a more fair comparison based on talent and schedule and what both of those teams will have potentially accomplished. You could throw Penn State in there as well. But I think the multiple losses that seems like everyone, except for maybe the 2 teams playing in the SEC championship game, will have, I think is going to make the bottom of this college football playoff ranking selection very, very interesting. And it's going to, I think, very well come down to, do we put a second ACC team in there, or do we put a multi-loss SEC team in there?
I also think the most overrated talking point right now is the potential log jam we could have in the SEC, because the last few weeks sort of proved this out. A couple of weeks ago, LSU's the hottest team in the SEC, and they lost to Texas A&M. Then Texas A&M is the hottest team in the SEC, and then they lost to South Carolina. That this idea there's going to be this glut of teams at 7-1 or this glut of teams at 6-2, even in the 14-team era of the SEC, history would suggest that just doesn't happen very much. That eventually this league, like a lot of leagues, but the league we care about here, just kind of winnows itself down here a bit. And this deal where you may have 6 sort of playoff-worthy teams in the SEC, all with similar rankings, I just don't quite think that's as likely to occur as some people think it is. You mentioned LSU, Alabama. One of those teams gets a 3rd loss on Saturday. If Ole Miss loses to Georgia, as they're technically, favored to do, that's a 3rd loss, for them. I mean, there is a way in which all of this ends up actually being pretty paint by numbers, and like Georgia and Tennessee, and then Texas and Texas A&M play in what sort of feels like kind of very traditional SEC East and sort of SEC West, type of sort of showdown finales here, that the kind of log jam and sort of tiebreaker craziness that some people think could happen, history suggests we're probably not going to get there.
Yeah, I'm not one of those doom predictors, and I'm not going to go full, touchscreen board behind me and going scenario by what happens. But, you and I are fond of gambling networks. You did give out Rice as a best bet on Go With The Flow last week, and not only did they cover against Navy, they won outright, might I remind those folks out there.
Thank you.
And so I think that, if you're just going by gambling odds and who is favored, there's a very real chance where, let's say, Alabama takes care of business this weekend against LSU, as they're favored to do so. You've got, as you just laid out, the scenario where Tennessee will play Georgia next week and Texas will play Texas A&M that last week. And the winners of those 2 games will meet in the SEC championship game. That is the cleanest and neatest scenario. I also right now happen to think that is the most likely scenario. Now, and I'm not give away a pick here yet. We have make our selections for Go With The Flow on Wednesday. Death Valley is a tough place to play at night. The last time Alabama went in there at night, they lost that game. So, plenty can go wrong there. And we've seen that happen before. But again, I think because these conferences are now so jumbled up and not everyone is playing each other. It's easy to be like, oh, look at all these scenarios that could possibly happen where Team X gets left out, even though they have such a lofty ranking. The losses will come. In college football, traditionally, the losses always come. Last year was actually a bit of an outlier where you had at the end of the season so many unbeaten and one-loss teams. The losses, I believe, are going to come. It could very well even end up coming to Georgia with the way they have been playing it late. But this stuff always sort of tends to suit itself out because that's just the randomness of football, especially when you are using 18 to 23-year-olds who play that game.
Let me squeeze in one final thing here quickly. I want to be respectful of your time. I believe last night you had a chance to see the Georgia basketball team begin its season. The debut of Asa Newell. Boy, what a performance for him, at least from a scoring standpoint. What did you think of the five-star freshman for Georgia, and what did you think of this new look Mike White squad overall?
Yeah, I think the most impressive thing, and Mike White pointed this out afterwards, was it's not like Georgia was running a ton of plays for Asa Newell. A lot of his stuff came on just easy action, transition, and really it's not just the scoring. Obviously 26 points, tying a record held by Dominique Wilkins for most points in a freshman debut. He had 11 rebounds. He had a huge block late in that game, sort of coming from behind to swat it at the rim. I think that his ability to right now be a complete player is something that fans should absolutely tune in for. Now, the rest of the team, outside of Dakota LaFew last night, who was huge for Georgia coming off the bench with 18 points, the team was 0 of 14 from three-point range, and that's not winning basketball. They were outscored by 21 points from behind the three-point arc. They've got to fix that going forward. I think right now they know their three-point defense is not where it needs to be, and that's something they've got to fix and shape up. It's a talented team. It is as talented a team as there has been in Athens in some time. It is a team that is going to compete in the SEC. And while, yes, I'm not necessarily willing to go out there and say they're going to make the NCAA tournament, this is a talented team and one that is worth following. And so because of that, because of Asa Newell, as he gets, I think, better throughout the season, he's got a chance to really make an impact and push Georgia basketball to a level where it has not been in close to a decade.
Connor, you are talented and worth following as well. We appreciate your time on our program today. I'll look forward to seeing you tonight on video or react to the top 25. We'll have some fun with that. I'm sure it'll be crazy, as it always is with this committee, but we'll look forward to doing that. And, of course, back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro again very soon, too.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff from Connor Riley. Jake Fromm, another great guest, coming up in just a couple of moments. Let's also get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. And let's get excited about everything that Royal Caribbean's got in store for you here in late 2024, early 2025. The weather's not great outside right now. I think I mentioned this yesterday. One of the reasons why I love, if you can sneak away for a fall cruise vacation, an early winter cruise vacation, I love going where it's warm when it's not perfect weather where we might happen to be. And that's what Royal Caribbean's really all about. They're sailing the whole, obviously we talk about April of 2025, our DawgNation cruise, but man, the winter is a great time to be on board a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation because honestly, I don't think I've ever been to Perfect Day Coco Cay when it wasn't like 80 and sunny and just about perfect. So Jessica Slater's a wonderful travel agent. She can tell you everything you need to know about how to plan a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, including Utopia of the Seas. The ship will be on in April for our DawgNation cruise. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. So to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here for a moment, we're talking about the potential elimination game between Alabama and LSU on Saturday. And I think this one is pretty fascinating because obviously at 9-3, assuming that the loser of this game would finish that way, you'd still have some chance of kind of being in that playoff discussion, a bit, depending on what's shaking out with the other conferences, especially with the idea that the committee would maybe prefer that additional SEC team in over an SMU or someone like that for the obvious reasons. But it's also going to be a much harder climb. And on the LSU side of this, if you think about this from like an elimination game type standpoint, this is more than just kind of making this playoff here this year. This is about Brian Kelly sort of putting his stamp on a season at LSU in a way that he just hasn't done at any point in time. And obviously, if you're kind of building up your program at a time in which Nick Saban's on top of college football, there's a little bit of, I guess, grace around that, perhaps. But now it's Kalen DeBoer. Not that DeBoer's a bad coach, but he's just less accomplished than Nick Saban was. Like, the stat is, well, he's never lost a night game at home as the LSU coach. Boy, I think this is a really big game for Kelly on Saturday. I really do. And I think it's a chance for him to remind folks that when he came to LSU from Notre Dame, having been in the playoff a couple of times, that this was a real pivotal figure in the sport, and that he still can be that at LSU, even after, the losses here this year, that he can still be that guy. On the flip side for Alabama, obviously, it seems like DeBoer has been kind of hanging on by a thread here a little bit in terms of the perception of his first year, not his job status, but the perception. And obviously a loss here for him on that would be pretty critical and would certainly get Alabama fans fired up. So pretty good drama in Baton Rouge on Saturday night between Alabama and LSU. We're looking forward to that. Speaking of drama, perhaps this is just my sort of Gator hater kind of colors coming out here for a moment. But you're talking about melodrama. This sort of feels like the most melodramatic thing in the world. Like if you listen to Florida people on Saturday, and I don't ever make fun of anybody's injury. I mean, I hate it for DJ Lagway or anybody. But if you listen to Florida people talking about the Lagway injury on Saturday, they made it sound like he had his leg amputated on the field, that his teammates had to watch his leg just get sawed off in front of everybody. That, I mean, the media was like basically after the game asking if Lagway was going to be okay for the start of next season. And obviously the card came out. That's all really serious. I don't make light of any of that. But did you know that yesterday Billy Napier stood up in front of the reporters and said there's a chance that Lagway may play this week? Like, that's what he said. Now, maybe that's gamesmanship. Maybe that's, sandbagging. Maybe he's just trying to, give Texas something to think about. Perhaps he is. Probably he is. But he did say, either way, this injury is nowhere near as serious we first thought that it was. Like, I feel like that's a pretty wide chasm of evaluations of, what they were saying Saturday at the point of, well, gosh, we would have beaten Georgia if not for the fact that DJ Lagway suffers this debilitating injury, to where it is now of, well, maybe there's a chance he may play this Saturday. Sort of feel like that's kind of weird, but maybe I'm the only one, and maybe that's just me and my overall feelings about Florida showing up there. But either way, interesting update there that the DJ Lagway injury nowhere near as serious as it was initially thought. And honestly, I'm kind of happy about that because even though I don't like Florida, I do like great football players, and DJ Lagway is certainly one of those. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, speaking of great football players, Jake Fromm is also one of those too, and as part of our Kroger Fresh Take, we'll get ready to say hello to Jake Fromm here right now. And obviously, Jake, there's been a lot of talk over the course of the last couple of days about what happened for Georgia in that game. And as I said yesterday, just to be honest, I thought the storyline for Georgia this season took a little bit of a twist. What's going on with Carson went from being sort of one of the things happening with this team to maybe being the most important talking point of all, where this was a building and an opponent that he dominated a year ago. And obviously on Saturday, the final stat line notwithstanding, that's not really necessarily the case. Like, what did you see from Carson on Saturday, and what do you make of kind of where he is at this point in the season?
Yeah, Brandon, thank you for having me here on the show. Watching the game, it looked like, early in the game, they're trying to get him comfortable, settled into the game. A lot of screen passes left and right, just trying to get this guy completions and confidence. Man, Carson's a really good football player, and he knows he is. Everybody on the field knows he is. But just at times he's trying to make plays maybe that just aren't quite there, maybe trying to force a play and trying to do too much. Man, sometimes you just got to let the play happen, play call and execute the play, and really let the rest take care of itself. He's surrounded by such a great cast of characters from the offensive line to the backs, to the receivers. Man, just put the ball in their hands and let them go make plays, and really all will take care of itself.
Yeah, and this is one of those deals where I find this to be kind of fascinating with sports. Obviously, my life and Carson Beck's life could not be more different. The average person probably thinks the same thing too. And yet we all have some experience with this, right? Where it's like if your confidence is shaken, you're just not as good as you otherwise would be, whatever your thing is, hosting a show, playing quarterback. If your confidence takes a hit, you sometimes kind of go out there a little bit, vulnerable to issues. And so I think it's tricky about like what you do about that if you're Georgia. Do you say, hey, man, you got to not worry about it. You got to go out there and let it rip. But if you do that, conceivably, the issues could compound on themselves. And all of a sudden now you've got an even bigger confidence issue. You could also say, okay, well, we're going to mitigate against this by calling some different kinds of plays. By my, observation, it seems like that's what Georgia kind of did in the second half, and it, for the most part, kind of worked. How you handle a lack of confidence is kind of a tricky thing for coaches, right?
Yeah. So, let's start with, hey, for any football player, for any player, any different sport, man, confidence is one of the most important things you can have as a player when you step on that football field. And even at the quarterback position, I would say it is even more important. And for Carson, man, you can see that he's trying to get through these struggles by saying, hey, I'm going to go out there and let it rip. Stetson always kind of had that thing about him. It didn't know whether things were going good, bad, and different. It didn't matter, man. Stetson was just going to go out there and let it rip and let it hang loose. Like he did not care. It looks like Carson's trying to do the same thing. And man, it's just the way the ball's falling right now, man, it just seems super unfortunate. And he's trying to force a few things maybe that aren't there. Like you said about mitigating risk, I really do kind of see that with the scheme, with the play calls, that they're trying to mitigate risk, man. They're trying to use Carson's skill set and the key players they have on the perimeter to get them the ball, i.e. with all these screen passes that they have. But, at the end of the day, you can't mitigate all the risk. And to win these big-time football games, you're going to have to push the ball down the field. Carson's the key in this picture. Carson's going to get this team, where they want to go. And if he could find his stride and get into a rhythm late in the season, I really think it's going to be tough for anybody to stop this crew.
If Kirby was sitting here right now, the one thing you would also say is that, well, y'all don't see, by y'all he means people like me, y'all don't see the plays that he changed the line of scrimmage, the way in which he reads the defense, things like that. And the truth is, I really don't. And I don't ever pretend otherwise, right? It's like I could watch every game all weekend long, and for the most part, that's what I do. And I just don't pay it. I just don't notice the stuff like that. That's just not how my brain necessarily works. But you are a quarterback. You may not know this playbook in particular, but you kind of know obviously a lot of this kind of stuff. Do you recognize that if you're watching a game on TV, how much do you pick up on, oh, yeah, well, Carson checked into this or changed into that or recognized this? Like, how often do you just sort of pick that up from watching a game, the sort of game within the game cerebral stuff that a guy like this is doing that someone like me, it just sort of goes over my head?
Yeah, he's doing exactly that thing, checking from this pass play to another pass play versus this look versus a pressure look, getting to an advantage throw, screen throw. He is doing all the things that they ask a quarterback at the University of Georgia to do to assess the defense, see what they're giving you, and then get our team and our players into the best position to succeed. And at the same time, getting to the play is one thing, and then executing that play is another thing. So that is the second half of this. Hey, just because we get to that play doesn't mean that play's over. We still have to go out and execute. And it's really not just on Carson, man. There's 10 other guys out there on the field that have to go and execute and do their job as well. So, the offense is such a rhythm and a team-oriented thing where, man, all 11 guys on the field have to be executing in the right direction for a play to succeed.
All right, so let me ask you this, because this has come up a lot, where some fans have sort of heard the way in which Kirby has spoken about some of the interceptions and things like that related to Carson. And Kirby's been very casual, very relaxed, very calm, just, hey, it's no big deal. Interception's going to happen. This is just all part of football. And what some fans have said is, man, Kirby does not speak that way about any other player on this team. He's screaming in Nate Frazier's face about doing the Gator jump in the throat slash. That's the intensity of Kirby, and somehow it's this sort of different version of Kirby when he's speaking about the quarterback. As someone who would have also heard Kirby speak about you, and perhaps at times maybe even do the same kind of thing, where a little bit more careful about how you speak about quarterback. What do you make of that attempt that some people kind of describe as a situation in which Kirby's trying to make it sound like it's no big deal, when a lot of people believe that privately his intimate thoughts are probably different than what he's saying out loud?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of play on both sides of this, where nobody's going to know how to coach his guys better than Kirby. So he's going to know how to get the most out of each individual guy in their own specific way. That way with Carson is, I think completely different than the way he got it out of me and out of Stetson, man. He was hey, if we did wrong, we were going to know about it. We were going to hear about it. And usually before we ever step foot on the sideline, we'd hear about it. So it's different depending on which guy you're looking at. But I do think there is definitely some cause for concern. I do think it is some big deal because at some point turnovers are going to bite you when you play against another really good football team. I got two good football teams coming up here, down the stretch in Ole Miss and Tennessee. If you lose the turnover battle in those football games, man, it is going to be a tough thing to overcome. So it is some cause for concern as well, but I think this is also an easy fix as well, and expect to get it fixed.
I want to finish by asking about Georgia's opponent for Saturday coming up. Let me remind folks prior to that's our Kroger Fresh Take with the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here right now, and obviously Thanksgiving is just ahead for us. It means turkey on the table, the sides to go with it, all the stuff that makes that great holiday so special for you and your family. You can get all of that at your local Kroger. And when you stop in store, you can take advantage of that. You can do your shopping online, Kroger.com. You can become a Kroger Boost member and get extra benefits and all that, including free delivery. If you don't have time to go pick the stuff up because you're trying to get it all cooked and you got family coming over, well, Kroger Boost takes care of that for you too. So Kroger.com gives you all the details you need about how you can make this upcoming Thanksgiving a special one for you and your family. So stop in store and shop today or online at Kroger.com. So, Jake, to wrap it up here today, obviously on the other side, you've got Lane Kiffin. And I'm curious, once again, as a quarterback and sort of a play caller and, someone who kind of obviously pays attention to the offensive side of the ball, what do you think makes Lane Kiffin a challenge for Georgia on Saturday?
Well, I would say earlier in the year, you mentioned earlier on your show about, the couple different issues on this Georgia team and really, Carson turning the ball over kind of became the big one. Well, the other one was how the defense and more importantly, the secondary was playing. And so this is kind of a big deal. You got Lane Kiffin, you got Jackson Dart, you got a quarterback who's able to attack you with his arm and his legs, which is, kind of proven difficult for a Georgia defense over the years. And then Kiffin, who kind of knows that scheme, been with Saban, Kirby, he knows what's going on, knows how to attack it. And then something else you mentioned on the show about Brian Kelly in Alabama. These coaches are searching for their signature wins, and they're trying to get into this playoff and get into the dance. Ole Miss is kind of right there on the bubble. LSU's on the bubble. These coaches are searching for their signature win, and they're going to put all their chips on the table and go all in to get this win. And Ole Miss is no different. And I know that Lane Kiffin is searching for that big win this year.
No, I think that's exactly right, and that's probably a pretty good way to look at this game on Saturday. It's a chance for Kiffin to get perhaps a bigger win than he's ever gotten in his coaching career before, and I think you're absolutely right about that. Jake, I always appreciate your time. Your insight's always so valuable, especially when it comes to these issues related to quarterbacks and things like that. You just know it all so well. So thanks for sharing your information with us here today. We appreciate that. We'll look forward to seeing you back here soon as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take on DawgNation Daily.
Thank you, Brandon.
Great stuff there from Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback. And I think he's right. A chance for, as Jake says, everybody craves those signature wins. And for Kiffin on Saturday, this would be his chance to get his biggest ever. And don't we know that is the case? We're going to have some fun here in a moment with a Georgia player who had kind of quite of a, what you might call a debut on Saturday. But prior to that, let me also remind you that, as Connor Riley said, listen, there's still a very much strong chance that Georgia makes the SEC championship coming up. It means Dogs back in Atlanta again, and if not that, perhaps a national championship game in Atlanta. A lot of big events here still to come in the month of December into January as it relates to college football here, and Georgia has a chance to be a part of a lot of those. And as you're making your plan for travel around all of that, I want you to think about our friends at Discover Dunwoody as a great place to stay when it comes to that. Hotels, a couple hundred, hotel, spots, room-wise, all around this area we are here right now. And that becomes a great chance for you to get a great rate on a wonderful hotel and an exciting opportunity if you're coming in for a big Georgia football game in Atlanta, perhaps at some point in time over the course of the next few months, or just some Christmas shopping, some things like that. Great restaurants, great shopping. It's conveniently located to anything happening in Buckhead or Midtown or downtown because kind of nestled right in between a couple of different MARTA stations. So you got 300 places to shop. You got a couple hundred restaurants. You got all kinds of hotel rooms, 2,100 rooms, in fact, in total here in the Dunwoody area. A lot of great opportunities for you. So get ready for a wonderful holiday season, a wonderful time in which Georgia could be in Atlanta a couple of times here if all goes well before this season's done. Discover Dunwoody going to tell you all about that. Get your shopping planned, get your hotel stay planned, check out some great restaurants. It is discoverdunwoody.com to find out more about that. Discoverdunwoody.com to find out more about that. Okay, so on Saturday, one of the really happy moments for Georgia against Florida was at the end of the game when Dwight Phillips, the really exciting athlete who's a part of this freshman class for Georgia, got a touchdown, and boy, everybody seemingly was just like really very happy about that. It was just a really great moment. I thought our Cody Chaffins did a really good job chronicling this in a video package that we put on our DawgNation YouTube page. I wanted to show this to you because I thought the moment for Phillips was great, but I thought the reaction to all this was really good too. This is a little bit of a kind of a look back on a touchdown for the freshman Dwight Phillips that everybody apparently calls Peanut, which I did not know. This is a really good video package put together by Cody Chaffins. I want you to take a look at this. Then there's something I need to tell you about all this here too. So take a look at this.
Great job by the offensive staff. They reached out to me on Tuesday or Wednesday and said, "Is Dwight going to travel?" Because he hasn't traveled every game, and said, "Yeah, he's going. He's up now with injuries at running back. He'll be an emergency running back." And they put a package in for him, and he did a great job. I mean, you're talking about everybody on that team loves that kid, Little Peanut. His parents are great people. Both ran track at Kentucky. His dad's an Olympic gold medalist, and just what a great story. I've never met a kid that everybody on the team likes as much as him, and he just works really hard. So I was really happy for him to get that play.
Dwight has a very funny personality, you know. He's a freshman. We love our freshmen, you know, and when a freshman go out there and make plays, it makes all of us proud, you know, because every day at practice, no matter if it's on special teams, scout team, no matter what, he doing what he's supposed to do, working his butt off every time. So it was a very proud moment for all of us to watch him score the touchdown, man. We was too lit. We all went to run on the field, but we couldn't, you know, go get a flag. But, yeah, it was very a good moment for all of us.
So great video, great story. I love that for Dwight Phillips. And anytime you see a player like that that kind of earns the sort of, I guess, affection of his teammates like that, that's just kind of a cool thing. Makes you really happy to be able to get a window into all of that. I think that's really good. So a really wonderful moment there. It's also, I have to confess, a little bit funny to me that when you watch like our YouTube video of this, Georgia kind of also put out their own version on their official account too, and you look in the comments section, you know, Dwight Phillips' nickname is Peanut, and the quote from Kirby was, "Everybody loves Peanut." Well, a lot of you are aware of this if you live online. You know, there's this weird story that's been out there about Peanut the squirrel. Do you know this? That authorities broke into this thing in New York and like confiscated the pet squirrel and ended up euthanizing the squirrel. It's like there's been this huge like internet phenomenon. And if you look at the comment sections from DawgNation, our YouTube page, if you look at the official Georgia account, like obviously there's, you know, just hundreds of people saying, "Boy, I'm happy for Dwight Phillips." But there's also a few people that say, "I sort of stumbled into this because I thought it was Peanut the squirrel, but good for this guy for scoring a touchdown." It's really very interesting how the Peanut the squirrel phenomenon and Georgia football have sort of overlapped here with this particular story. Well, unfortunately, there is, I think, a news update that I need to give you on all of this that I don't think you're going to be very happy about, but I do need to tell you about that here coming up in just a moment. But prior to that, I do want to give a shout out to our friends at the Finish Long Drink there as well. You know, a lot of folks enjoyed the cocktail party on Saturday. When you love the cocktail party, you love ready-to-drink cocktails. Mixed drinks that you don't have to mix yourself. Well, that's what the Finish Long Drink is all about. All kinds of great varieties. And if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can sort of select the one that you think's best for you. Folks are enjoying this. The peach-flavored version, you know, it's the traditional citrus, which I've always loved. It's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. I believe that's our buddy Kaylee Manziel's favorite, too. Long drink cranberry, long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. I probably should be drinking that. It'd be a good decision for me if I did. But the point is that there's a finished long drink variety out there for you. And as you head towards a holiday time of year in which you're getting together with family and friends, boy, the finished long drink goes great with all of that. So go to thelongdrink.com, learn the story of how it kind of started in Finland but made its way to America and how it's here for all of you now. And find out more about that online at thelongdrink.com. So I told you that a lot of people have been aware of this Peanut the squirrel story about, you know, people I'd seen this like viral video of the squirrel. They call the authorities. The authorities, they go in and they essentially, kill the squirrel, right? It's a very sad story. Well, our obvious, mascot here on DawgNation Daily, Eddie the blind squirrel, has gotten wind of all of this. And I think that Eddie, because, talk a little trash after the Florida game, you do stuff like that. I think Eddie apparently has become afraid that the lousy, stinking Gators were going to come after him, much the same way that, supposedly, allegedly, people went after this Peanut the squirrel in the story that you perhaps saw. So Eddie, and you'll notice in the desk, you don't see Eddie here today. You see the Billy Napier water bottle. You see a lot of our other paraphernalia or DawgNation Daily football helmet. But you don't see Eddie the blind squirrel here today. Eddie has, I'm afraid to say, gone into hiding. Eddie's not here today, and I don't know when we will see Eddie again, but I did want to let you know that. So today, for a golden shoe, I have to just acknowledge that Eddie now is fearful for his life. And Eddie has gone into hiding. And so I'm going to put it out here as a message, free Eddie. I want Eddie to be free to show up here and, live the media career, the life that he deserves to live as the mascot. But for today, there is an empty space where Eddie stands. Eddie is not here. And unfortunately, he doesn't feel safe. So with that, we will obviously do the show, but we do it obviously not, with our full complement of staff here because the mascot of DawgNation Daily, Eddie, is not with us here today. So I hope we see Eddie soon. I hope that he feels safe to kind of come back out from hiding. But for now, just given the climate around squirrels at the moment, Eddie thinks it's better if he sort of stays in a undisclosed location. So I say free Eddie. I hope we see him again soon. We will certainly keep you updated on that. Lousy, stinking Gators, they may be coming after our squirrel, but they have had no success against these Georgia Bulldogs, even if Billy Napier thinks they came closer than usual this time around. About 1,459 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator hater updater. We love that, but we do miss Eddie. So we hope to see him soon. Free Eddie, we'll say that. And see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. I do hate to tell you all that about Eddie. I don't obviously take pleasure in anything like that. It's always very sad when anytime someone's fearful for their life. That's obviously always a very sad thing, but it's also, my responsibility to be honest. And so if the climate changes, perhaps Eddie returns. But right now, he does have reason to believe that people are after him. And so because of that, we're going to let him stay secluded and in hiding. So yeah, there you go. Justin Ham says, come on back, Eddie. Gerald Harmon says, run, Eddie, run. Yeah, I mean, it's a sad thing. Wayne Kirkland says, if they come for Eddie, BA better go down in a blaze of glory protecting him. Listen, I'll do anything that I can to protect Eddie. I mean, Eddie's been a part of our show. As we did the retrospective the other day, he's been a part of our show since like 2017 or 2018, something like that. Yeah, 2018, I guess it would have been. Very, very sad. Very, very sad. So, yeah, I do have to report that. Robert Weaver also wants to see a repeat of the performance against Texas against Ole Miss. I do think, on a serious note, that would be it'd be a great time to have that. As Jake just said, I think he laid it out very well. This is Lane Kiffin looking for his signature win there at Ole Miss, and obviously preventing him from getting that would certainly be a very important thing to be able to do. Let me also pop over to a YouTube for a moment. By the way, I can't go super long on comments today, and I do apologize for that. Porter says that he hopes that Eddie returns as soon as possible. I appreciate that. You guys are very kind to show your support. Scott Pete says Eddie's not scared of any Gators. Yeah, but you guys have seen the news. Some of this stuff is serious. Joan Blackburn says, poor Eddie, free Eddie. Yes, a lot of folks weighing in here. Let's see what else. Foster Moss weighing in. Jonathan Aaron says, how much red food coloring did you dump in the pools in Jacksonville? Yeah, no food coloring for me on that. Although the thing that started all of this, we may have something to say about that pretty soon. I can't say that now, but we may have that at some point in time. By the way, Colby Strotter says his Vikings won the Wintersville Classic, and my dogs won the cocktail party. Yeah, obviously, Friday night was Lowndes Valdosta, the Vikings taking that one. And then just down the road, down 75, you had, and then across 95, you had Georgia beating Florida on Saturday. 30-20 Delmar Lane says about Ellis Robinson. Listen, I mean, obviously, as the season progresses, a guy like Robinson, certainly going to have, his chance to make an impact on this. We've kind of called for that before. Maybe that happens on Saturday. Illy W.O. Is it Illy Woe? Is that how you say that? Says our depth is so crazy. You got a long climb up the depth chart. Some can't even make the games, let alone crack the depth chart. Yeah, not easy to do. But at the same time, eventually talent's going to win out. I mean, obviously, folks have had their issues with the Georgia secondary before. Look, I think that there's also a little bit of an, as we said earlier, a little bit of an overstating of what Ole Miss has been offensively this year. Like, this is not, this is a team that scored 30 points one time against SEC teams here this year. Now, they put up, a whopping total against Arkansas on Saturday, but this has not exactly been, the greatest show on turf for most of this season. Adam J. on the subject of the cops on Saturday. So this came up yesterday, and I said at the time I wanted to kind of wait for more information to come out. I think some more information on this has come out, but I sort of still think I want to wait for a little bit more on this. There were a couple of different videos that showed altercations between police and like fans. And one video, it was like a Florida fan. And I'll be totally honest with you on this. Totally honest. My first instinct was to almost kind of laugh about that because it was a Florida fan or something like that. You see these videos all the time. I'm glad that I didn't, because then another video came out of what I believe was a completely different incident. And look, a lot of these like very, very short videos are at times very misleading. That additional context just brings more information to the forefront. So we kind of wanted to wait on this. Well, now you do have more information out there, but I sort of still don't feel like I know the full story in all of this. I definitely have a lot of thoughts, but it's just one of those deals where, you see this kind of stuff sort of pop up post-game in the sort of same bucket as a lot of the other viral videos, and it just kind of becomes content. But when you sort of connect this together, you sort of feel like there's probably a deeper story there on this. But I definitely was aware of that. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's pretty weird. I guess the city of Jacksonville is saying their statement. I don't quite have the statement in front of me, so I'm not going to reference that too much, and I'm not going to sort of give any kind of opinion on this, but pretty strange. I think the whole thing was certainly, it's one of those deals where you saw it late Saturday night and just thought, you see, look, there's all kinds of accounts all the time that sort of share videos of fights during games. There's just a lot of that online. And if you're scrolling your phone, you can't help but kind of get dragged into some of that sometimes. You just can't. It's almost unavoidable. And so at first blush, this sort of feels like something sort of connected to that. But then you sort of realize, this actually may have been a little bit of a bigger type thing. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute and see what's going on over there. Let's see what else. DT says he thinks this Georgia basketball team is as talented as any Georgia team since 1981. Perhaps that's the case. Obviously, that's including a Final Four team in 1983, which honestly I don't really know that much about, other than I guess what Vern Fleming was he the star on that team. But I mean, it certainly has a chance to be a more interesting Georgia team than we've seen in quite some time. It really does, and I think a lot of Georgia fans are ready for that. This is obviously a fan base that, I mean, the interest in football may be 1,000 times bigger than the interest in basketball. Unfortunately, as someone who likes basketball, I wish basketball was sometimes more popular. But this could be a Georgia team that certainly generates a little more interest for sure. Savannah Bryant says Heather Dinich, as he calls her, a known Georgian SEC hater, said the committee had to decide between the better win, Georgia at Texas or Ohio State at Penn State. Night game on the road, the number one team with the number one defense, or a team led by James Franklin. Yeah, see, stuff like that's what drives you crazy, because Penn State's never beaten anyone of note. Texas won at Alabama last year, made the college football playoff. The idea that somehow there's any conceivable path to concluding that Ohio State winning at Penn State is as big as Georgia winning at Texas, that seems to strain the imagination, I would say, a bit. Seems to strain the imagination. But nonetheless, that's some of the conversation that's out there. And, look, even in a 12-team playoff world, you've probably reduced the power that the committee has to make these kinds of decisions, but the committee still has some power. And the one thing that's sort of frustrated us sort of week to week, year to year, is the kind of inconsistent judgment that the committee shows. Some of that's because the people on the committee change, but the truth is the committee still, for the most part, operates the same way, even with different names there. It's essentially representative of the sort of blob of athletic directors who kind of make all these decisions for the sport anyway at the behest of what television wants. And so there's no doubt probably some frustrating stuff to come on all this. I would say that's probably true. Scott Harris says our secondary will be tested for the next 2 weeks. Don't get me wrong. It will. I'm not saying it won't. But I do think, though, that for the most part, Ole Miss this year has been a little different than they're being treated now on the basis of just one game against Arkansas. Other than that, the only really spectacular Ole Miss offensive performances have been a 40-point performance at Wake Forest and a handful of games against Group of Five and FCS teams. And that is especially true for Tennessee. Y'all, Tennessee's not better offensively than Georgia is. In fact, let's see this right now for a second. Let me see if I can pull this up quickly. Like Tennessee, without getting into the DawgNation.com comments. And this is not me like talking trash and like that. I'm not saying the Tennessee game is going to be easy to win, because it's not. It's going to be very hard to win. But what has made Tennessee this year has really been more its defense than its offense. Nico is not having that great of a year. Tennessee's not scoring very many points, including against Kentucky on Saturday. But if you look at, let's look at scoring offense here for a moment. Yeah, so Georgia is fifth in the SEC at 33.1 points per game. Tennessee is second at 38. So they're scoring about 3 points per game more than Georgia, but not wildly more so. Also, if you look at, let's look at yards per play. If you look at yards, let's see, I messed up. Let's see if we can get, see if we can get the yards per play number here for a moment. If you look at yards per play, so Georgia's seventh, Tennessee is eighth. So Georgia's slightly better from yards per play standpoint. Tennessee slightly better from a points per game standpoint. Georgia's obviously played the much more difficult schedule. So it's really weird that, by reputation, you think, well, if Tennessee's, in the top 10 and competing for a playoff spot, it must be with what Josh Heupel's typically known for. But this has not really been a typical Josh Heupel offense this year. In fact, far from it. Let's see what else. Wildman Slayer also excited about the night game for Georgia against Tennessee. And I'm really excited about that too. This is it's a big deal for Georgia, unfortunately, to get a home night game like this. Fans have wanted it forever. I think the atmosphere has a chance to be every bit as good as it was for Tennessee a couple of years ago. I think this is a pretty big deal. I think Wildman's right about that. Todd Greer says, going back to the old conversation we were having a moment ago about comparing the wins, he says, Texas was number 1 when Georgia beat him. How is the Ohio State win over Penn State even close? Todd, I think that's a fair question. Garrison Tucker hoping to see Tate Ratledge at 100%. Daniel Nelson says, people aren't giving enough credit to Ole Miss's defense. Georgia's going to play 2 of the top 5 defenses in yards per play these next 2 weeks. Daniel's actually 100% right about that. The Ole Miss defensive line, this is where they spent big bucks in the transfer portal. Like, that's a really good defensive line, way better than we're used to seeing from a Lane Kiffin coach team, and certainly anything you've seen, from Ole Miss in a non-sort of, pay-for-play type recruiting class. This is a very good Ole Miss defensive line. That's the truth, is that the real challenge of kind of facing these 2 next opponents, not the offensive-minded head coaches, it's the surprisingly good defenses for both these teams. Foster Moss says, what spot would you prefer in the playoffs? Is the SEC championship worth it? So the way I've been answering this question, Foster, is that I believe over the course of a period of years, if you look at the 4 teams that get the bye and compare that to, like, say, the next 4 at-large teams, the kind of wild card teams that make it, over the course of a 10-year period, I believe there will be more 5, 6, 7, 8 seeds win national championships than there will be 1, 2, 3, or 4 seeds. So I don't believe the bye is all that valuable in terms of making your championship more likely. I don't. But I also don't feel like, people have tried to, like, chop this up so that it's somehow a negative to make the SEC championship. And I really don't think it is. I guess in a roundabout way, it could be a negative if you lose the game because, you could lose the SEC championship and have to play a 17-game schedule, right? 13 plus 4 playoff games, right? You'd have to do that. But if you win the game, it's basically the same number of games as if you're the 5 seed. So the winner of the SEC championship, the 5 seed, would still play the same number of games, and they would actually get the same number of weeks off, too. They would just be kind of configured a little bit differently. I guess you can make some case that if you make the SEC championship and don't win, you're at a slight disadvantage. But the truth is, maybe like Georgia in 2021, if you go into the SEC championship knowing you're already in the playoff, that may impact how you coach the game, too, which could mitigate against some of that. So a lot to think about in that regard. All right, a couple more comments. We'll get ready to go. Back on Facebook for a moment. Get ready to wrap it up here in a bit. Winfred Steinspring asking about Justice Terry. I think that people still feel pretty good about Justice Terry, but Terry has said he's not making his decision until December. That is the case. Ken Holcomb says Dwight Phillips, known as Peanuts, faster than Michael J. Fox's DeLorean in Back to the Future. Yeah, this is one of those things where, I sort of thought, unfortunately, Phillips was probably a little ways away from being able to play just because a little bit of a different style for a Georgia running back. But Georgia needing to kind of get anything he can going offensively, bringing in a speedster like this, making him part of the equation, maybe we will see more of that. Robert Weaver wants to see more of the outside runs. I do believe that it's sort of the inverse of a problem that Georgia sometimes has defensively, where they've had a hard time setting the edge defensively. I do think and this may go back to, as funny as this sounds, because it's been kind of a punchline for Georgia, people laugh about the wide receivers being asked to block. I do think that perhaps, around look, I can't fully explain this, but it seems to be true. Around the time that Georgia became a better passing team, their running numbers started going down. And it may just be a coincidence, but it certainly seems like, and I love Todd Monken. Todd Monken's a brilliant offensive mind. He's killing it with the Ravens right now. I mean, everybody obviously respects the role that Monken played in 2 national championships at Georgia. But Georgia stopped having explosive runs around the time that the Monken transformation happened with his offense. And, I mean, I think one assumption you can have is that the receivers don't block as well on the outside as they used to. They're either not being asked to do that as much or whatever, that when Georgia was like just cleaning house and having, a pair of backs get 2,500 yards between them, there were receivers that were really killing it blocking on the edge. Like J.J. Holloman used to be really good at that back in the early days of Kirby Smart. And they just don't do that as much anymore, it seems like. I mean, sometimes these things aren't as connected as they appear, but around 2020, 2021, Georgia started passing it more and passing it better. And the kind of explosive sort of 10, 15-plus yard runs, they started going down. And they have kind of stayed there since then. It's just an interesting thing that it seems like it almost would appear they traded one thing for the other. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Robert Weaver says Dylan Bell is a good blocker. I would say that's probably true. Rob Phillips on the subject of Anthony Evans. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think that you've seen this happen with coaches. And I listened to the Billy Napier press conference, and he was very much adamant about this. And I think that Kirby Smart's mostly doing this too. I have a theory that coaches are now saying less about injuries because in their mind, the availability report is their statement about injuries. And so it used to be that sometimes Kirby would give you the we're hopeful to get him back, but sometimes Kirby would actually give you something approximating real information. Now, I believe that all coaches are getting a lot more buttoned up about injuries because they're like, well, the availability report's coming back. I don't have to talk about this anymore. And so most of them are kind of doing that. Winfred Steinspring also asking about getting one of the running backs back. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I frequently am. I'm not hopeful of that at all. I don't get the impression that Roderick or Branson are close to playing at all. And obviously Georgia could use them both, but it seems like they're both, certainly in the case of Roderick Robinson for sure, pretty banged up. Joshua Brown says we're missing Ra and Colby Young badly with the run game. Smith and Lovett are too small to block in the run game. It could be that's the case. Obviously, a good run blocker is going to be a bigger receiver. That's probably true. Let's see what else. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming on the subject of getting a Texas-style win or a Clemson-style win. It'd be great, man. It'd be great. Kind of restore some of that confidence. And I think the Georgia fans should be confident. Did I mention this in the show? So I was listening to this like gambling expert type guy the other day. And, the way that the gambling experts work is they base their opinions on games, what they call their power rating. So they'll look at a number of factors, coaching strength, offensive strength, defensive strength, just a bunch of things. And they'll give various ratings to these various factors. You add all that up, and that kind of gives a composite score for that team. And you compare the composite score you have for one team to the composite score you have for another team, and that is your theoretical spread on that game. And if your theoretical spread on that game shows value in comparison to the actual spread, that's when what you think of as a sharp bettor, that's when a bettor would choose to make a bet, is when he sees or she sees a spread that is different than the actual number should be. And the quality of your number is based on how much you weight the various things within in the power rating. The point is some guy the other day said, based on his power ratings, that 2022 Georgia would be a 10-point favorite at least on every team in America. That there's no team in college ball now that Georgia from 2022 wouldn't be at least a double-digit favorite against. And furthermore, he said the 2022 Tennessee team would be at least a half-point favorite over everybody in college football right now. So we have a major regression in terms of the overall quality of the top teams in the country. What we don't quite yet know is some of the little, blemishes we see with Georgia, if that's a reflection of Georgia just not quite being good enough to get it done, or if that's a reflection of just sort of the natural regression from kind of an all-time talent high that maybe the sport had when Georgia was winning titles in 2021 and 2022. We don't quite know that yet. We may not fully know that until the end of the season. But that is what the discussion is here right now. All right, let's see if we can get a couple more. We're going to have to go. Cowboy Jay asking about Oscar Delp. The truth is, I think that Delp's starting to come on a little bit here right now. Had a big block on the Dominic Lovett touchdown on Saturday. Had a big catch himself. I think that the Delp may be starting to come on here a little bit. Garrison Tucker says back in 2016 when Georgia was there that Vaught Hemingway Stadium did not get loud. It's just not quite big enough. That's interesting. Worth paying attention to for sure. Adam J. predicting Georgia will stomp Ole Miss. That's fun to consider. Let me go back to DawgNation.com real quick, then we're going to go. DT says the committee basically understands that college ball is a television product. I think for the most part that's true. I do. Darlene says, do you think the weather this weekend will be a concern or an advantage? Two things on that. And I think I said these before the show began today too. I'll say it again now. I'm always a little hesitant to make too big of a deal about the weather early in the week because oftentimes by late in the week it changes. Think about the big deal we made about the rain prior to the Kentucky game. It didn't even rain. It's like sometimes this stuff changes. But let's say that the rain that's forecasted does come. Once again, to go back to gambling experts for a moment, this is a little bit counterintuitive. But I think we have a tendency to think that rain means low scoring, defensive-oriented, running the ball type games. I think the gambling experts will tell you that rain actually correlates with the over more so than the under. In other words, the projected total points, a rainy game oftentimes leads to an over more frequently than it leads to an under. That's a little bit counterintuitive. Some of that's related to like a Saturday game where you got Jackson Dart on one side, Carson Beck on the other. These are pretty big quarterbacks, big hands. They can hold that wet football and they can release it pretty well. They're not going to have an issue with that. Also, receivers know what route they want to run. Defensive backs are trying to keep up with them. If there's some slip sliding going on, it's oftentimes a defensive back who's doing the slipping and the sliding and not necessarily the wide receivers and the pass catchers. What correlates with an under more often than anything is wind, and maybe Saturday's windy too, but that's what leads to a lower scoring game. That oftentimes rain actually is a slight correlation to an over, meaning above the projected total of points, whereas if it's windy conditions, that may be the thing that grounds the passing games for Saturday. But for that, we'll leave it here for right now. We appreciate you being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Oh, yeah, sad music coming in here. I mean, honestly, I think this is a sad time. I do. Anytime someone doesn't feel safe to come to work, it's always a concern. But we'll keep a good thought. We'll hope to see Eddie back soon. And if I get any correspondence from Eddie or anything like that, I will let you know. And, of course, we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.